Thank you.
And let's bring in our legal panel now. Criminal defense attorney and former Manhattan prosecutor Jeremy Saland and NBC News legal analyst Misty Maris. All right, so Jeremy, starting with you, this decision, did the defense pave the way here for enough reasonable doubt, or was this more of like the prosecution kind of blew it?
You know, I think the prosecution blew it, if that's the right term, out of the gate, meaning they were greedy, meaning they were arrogant, meaning that this case had no place in a federal court for RICO conspiracy. I've said it from the beginning, this is more akin to a state prosecution for a domestic violence assault. This is more akin to some sort of violence, you know, in terms of assault type cases, but not necessarily something that constituted a larger scale force, coercion, and fraud sex trafficking case. You know, but that's the Southern District. And that's what they did. But credit also has to go directly, not just because they failed the case, it has to go to Mark Agnifilo. And we're in New York, and I think of Aaron Judge hitting home runs. That defense team really creamed that ball out of the park. And you would say to them, well, wait a second, you didn't call anyone as a defense witness. Heck, you didn't even hear from Sean Combs. But they did what they needed to do to poke enough holes, and there was so much lacking that they were able to get it over the finish line for just this Mann Act violation.
Give it over the finish line there, but definitely, you know, not out of jail at this point.
No, but it's a huge win.
Misty, yeah, 10 months, as we've reported so far. Misty, what do you think this is going to mean for Combs' potential prison time going forward?
So that 10 months will be what's called time served, meaning it will cut against any time that he gets as a sentence. And we got a real view into what the arguments are going to be by the prosecution and the defense today from this bail hearing. Both submitted letters to the court in support of, on the defense perspective, Diddy getting bail, and against it by the prosecution. And we see the prosecution's theory is that he is a threat to society. They're seeking 51 to 63 months and possibly more at the sentencing hearing. They're going to focus on what we call aggravating factors, things that the prosecution sees as reasons Combs should spend more time behind bars, up to maybe even that 10-year maximum. Now, the defense, totally different view, 21 to 27. Gotti, that's like 2.5 years. That means 10 months time served plus the months before he is at that sentencing hearing. He could have served a significant amount of it before the sentence even is handed down by the judge. So this is what we can expect to hear during the sentencing hearing, and ultimately the judge is going to have discretion.
And Jeremy, the crossing state lines charge, would that have even come up if it wasn't for the RICO charge, or did RICO just open the door there?
Yeah, again, I think federal prosecutors in the Southern District were throwing whatever they could, hoping something would stick. Let's think for a second. I think of Elliot Spitzer as the last person, at least publicly, that we're hearing of or had some notoriety to it, who was at least considered to be prosecuted solely for a Mann Act charge. And you don't hear that because it generally doesn't happen, because this is a statute that has its roots in some questionable history that maybe in the early turn of the 20th century was used. But you don't see it alone. It's part of that fabric and those predicate acts, and that how we build up to the RICO charge, and really was a foundational charge for the sex crimes too. But it really had no place here, other than it was a kind of the throwaway, and it guaranteed to a certain extent that the prosecution could hold their head up, relatively speaking, and get a certain, relatively so, conviction. But if it was just on an island, you wouldn't see it, just like Elliot Spitzer wasn't prosecuted for it, among other reasons. We weren't in that room when the decisions were made. But it does not shock me you're not seeing it by itself, and it's attached to this RICO charge.
And Missy, speaking of a charge that we didn't see, like, this has been a question over and over again throughout the trial, even beforehand, the hotel video. Domestic abuse was acknowledged head on. The judge talked about it today, and yet that was never a charge here. Why not? Can you remind us again?
Absolutely. So, Gotti, those would have been state-level charges that could have been brought in the jurisdiction where they happened by state prosecutors. But by the time, specifically, that Intercontinental Intercontinental video from 2016 came to light, the statute of limitations had long lapsed. And that is the case with all of that abusive conduct that we heard about throughout the trial. All of the opportunities to charge that at the state level were gone. That's when you see the federal government stepping in. The statute of limitations on sex trafficking and RICO, it is so much more broad. They're not time barred under that statute. And RICO, whether or not it was justifiable, and I'm with Jeremy that it was not in this particular case, it opened up the door to a lot of evidence that came into the courtroom that otherwise the jury never would have seen because of that statute of limitations issue. So to a certain extent, it's strategic on behalf of the prosecutors.
And Jeremy, you watched these types of trials. We've got two trials going over, two big cases going on today. What kinds of repercussions or long-term effects do you think that today's decision, from the bail decision to the dismissal of these charges, do you think is going to have on celebrity trials going forward?
You know, I'd like to think that everyone does things for the right reasons, that a case like this or any future case, whether celebrity or not, will rise and fall on its own merits. I think, unfortunately, in the world that we find ourselves all too often, and this is not to besmirch prosecutors at all. I'm a former prosecutor, and I think line assistants do things for the right reasons, even if subjectively. But sometimes we let that celebrity get in front of us, and we heard the term bigfooting. For example, we have the Mangione case, which really, in my opinion, doesn't belong in a federal court. It is a state case. So we want to really make sure that victims come forward and are not dissuaded from doing so when they're victims of crimes, and they feel confident that they'll have a just resolution, even if it doesn't work out. But we also want to make sure the accused have that same protection, arguably more because of the power of what can happen if you're falsely accused. But I hope the Southern District takes away from this is you don't throw something at the wall hoping it's going to stick. You do it because it's right, not because it's easy. And it certainly wasn't easy when we heard that result.
Yeah. Missy, real fast, what are the chances, do you think, of seeing a possible appeal on this case?
I think Diddy will definitely appeal the Mann Act. He'll appeal his sentence. He has the right to appeal. When there's an acquittal, Gotti, it is over. He is not guilty, and that will stand. But there's more to come for Combs outside of this criminal case. This was by far his biggest legal hurdle. But remember, we have all those civil lawsuits waiting in the wings. So more to come in the court system on Sean Diddy Combs.
Yeah, and we'll stay tuned. Jeremy Saland, Misty Maris, thank you so much for being with us. And joining us now is reputation and crisis strategist Malik